Welcome to part 61 of my video series on how to use Blender 2.7. In this video we're going to be finishing off our Lego character by creating his hand, and we're also going to be improving the plastic materials on the Lego character so that it actually looks more like plastic. And finally we're going to be attaching all of the pieces together in a parent-child hierarchy using constraints so that all the pieces will move around when you grab just the hip bone, so you can animate the character quite easily, but all the pieces will only be able to move because of those constraints in a way that's actually physically possible. In other words, you won't be able to rotate the arms kind of side to side like that, but only in their proper direction. If you have not seen part 1 and part 2 in this mini-series on how to create a Lego person, I'll put both links to those first two videos on the screen right now in the description area below. If you have not checked those out, I highly suggest it. This is part 3 in this mini-series, but let's go ahead and jump in. Of course, if I go to my front view in this window over here, or my side view, you can see the schematic images from the front and from the side of our Lego person. In this video, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make the character's hand or claw. As of course, as I pointed out in the last video, the pictures are not quite right. These images have the hand and the bottom of the arm in the wrong spots. We're not in the same spot, so you can see the top of this hand does not line up well with that one. So we're just going to kind of be going and using the side reference for the most part in terms of the hand's position, but looking at the front here for the shape. Let's go ahead and make both parts separately. In other words, we're going to make the wrist section, which is just a cylinder that kind of gets narrower and goes inside the arm, and then we'll make the cylinder which points in a 90-degree different direction for the hand, and we'll boolean those together. Let's go ahead and put our 3D cursor right about there. I'll press Shift A. I'm going to add a mesh cylinder. It's way too big, so I'll scale it down and I'll rotate it with the R key. So it's kind of matching the same direction as the bottom of the arm. In fact, what I'll do is I'll move it over and carefully correct it so it's about the right size. If I go into edit mode with the tab key, of course, and select that face on the end, if I want to move that face sort of inwards or up, I can just press G, but then I won't have control over it. So if I press G and then Z twice, so G and then Z, Z, it will move on its local axes. And as you know, if you change your gizmo down here to local, it will point in the direction of the actual face. It's similar to normal, which might actually give you better results sometimes, but in this case we're just going to leave it on global, and I'll press G and then Z and then the Z again to make it go in that direction. Great, let's go ahead and grab that end face. I'll move it G and ZZ just a little bit closer, and I will inset it. So I'll tap I to inset it. I can't really tell how far I'm going in, but I think that's about right. And then I'll tap E to extrude. No, I was not at all right, but that's okay. I'm going to press Control plus on my keyboard. Control plus will expand my selection once. So I have that circle selected. Expanding it once will get all these side faces selected. And now if I tap S to scale, but then I tap Shift and then I tap with Shift held down, I tap Z twice. That will stop it from scaling on that local Z axis, and now I can scale only that. So that, again, that was S and then Shift, and then with Shift held down, press Z twice. And there we go. Now, why is that not lining up properly? Is that not right? It seems like my... There we go, I just moved it up there. I just had it in the wrong spot, that's all. Good, let's go ahead. Actually, what I realize I need to do is make this wrist longer. So I'm going to grab that face and G, Z, Z, move it down into the hand because I need to intersect for our Boolean to work properly. Let's go ahead and add the hand cylinder. So in object mode, this is going to be a separate object here. I'll add a mesh cylinder. I'm not worrying about the fact that this has a default number of edges around the circle, which is 32. That's fine for me. So I'll tap S to scale that down. The top of the circle is going to go from the side, it'll go up there, and the bottom will go down there. So I'm going to rotate it that right way, not that way, but that way. And I'll put it right about there. Again, I want to make sure that the angle is correct approximately. So I'll put it right there. I'll rotate it about like that. I will put it right about in the right spot. In fact, it's not quite big enough, so I'll put it right there. I'll S to scale that out. And that's looking pretty good to me. Now, the bottom of the hand actually curves up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on proportional editing down here. Of course, I can orbit in this header down here. I'm going to turn on proportional editing right there, and that means that I can go into edit mode, and if I grab one of these vertices and move it, oh, pardon me, proportional editing turns on differently when you're in edit mode. You can see it's turned back off again here. If I press tab to go back into object mode from edit mode, you can see it's on right now in object mode, but if I go into edit mode, it's not on. So I'll turn it off in object mode. I'll press tab to go into edit mode, and I'll turn it back on to enabled. So now if I press G, you can see that lots of things are moving because that circle is quite big on my screen, but if I scroll up, you can see I can change the size of it. So what I want to do here is I want to move, that vertex up in that direction, but I want to make sure my fall off, my proportional editing fall off, is set to smooth again. It was set to linear because when we made the legs diagonal, we used linear, so it would be a straight line. But in this case, we want a curved line, so I'll go to smooth. I'm going to press G and I believe Z twice. And that way I can move that up like that. Now you can adjust the size of your circle here to be bigger or smaller, but what I'm looking for is for my edge of vertices, and I'm going to go into solid view so you can see this, G and then Z twice. I can scroll up or scroll down to make that size different, and I think that looks maybe okay. So it might look a little bit funny, and that's because you have a big n-gon here, and you don't have the edges that actually go this way. Am I going to bother making those edges? I could actually select the vertices that are opposite one another and press J, so you kind of get a little bit more surface detail along, and I'm pressing J to join and Shift to select the vertices on opposite sides. That's just so we get more detail, and I think that's looking pretty good. Maybe one more right about there. J. Make sure you turn off proportional editing to disabled in edit mode so that you're not going to mess it up at all. So as you can see now, we have a pretty good bottom out of the hand. What I want to do now is cut out a circle and actually expand that circle out to cut away from the front of the hand as well, so that we get that opening for the hand. So from the side view, I'm going to press Shift A with my 3D cursor somewhere in the middle of the hand, and I'll press Shift A and add a cylinder. It's way too big. I'll scale it down, and again we'll rotate it so it's matching that same angle right about there. I can scale it down now, not worry about its rotation, so we'll put it right about there. I'll press S and then Z twice to make it longer because we want to cut through the entire hand. And I'll go to my top view and I'll move it into the middle of the hand right about there. And how's it looking right now? Well, it's not exactly straight on. I can see that that's narrower than that, so I'll move it down a little bit like that. How's it looking from that side? Well, that looks about the same as far as I can tell. How's it looking from the top? Side to side, looking just about right. I can look at the edges here and see, hey, that edge and that edge are about the same, maybe a little bit over, just a tiny bit, right about there. That looks pretty good to me. Let's go ahead and add a boolean. But before I do that, actually, I'm going to grab some of the faces and pull them forward in edit mode here. So I'll go into edit mode of that, and they are separate objects, so we can go into edit mode of just one, and I'll select maybe these vertices. What I'll do actually is go into my front view so you can see how big the opening is at the front of the hand or claw. So it's going to be maybe about that, 1, 2, right about there, and I got to get one more face just like that selected. So now if I go to my front view, I can see the same number of faces. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on either side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 10 in total. What I'll do now is I'll extrude out, so E, and I'll move forward. And because the claw kind of cuts in that direction, I'm going to press S and then X to make that a bit wider, so the opening of the claw is a bit bigger right there. We're going to change how the curve at the front of the claw is, but for now that looks pretty good to me. Let's go ahead and boolean. That means we'll use this object to cut away from that object. So I'm going to select the hand first, or the claw first, and go up to my wrench tab. Under add modifier, we're going to add the boolean modifier. But for now, we're not going to do the intersect operation. We're going to do the difference operation. That means we're going to use a second object, which I'm going to name under the object tab, hand cut away So now under the wrench tab again, I can find that object quite easily and cut away. And if I go into Wireframe, you can actually see what that's going to look like, despite there being some bad kind of edges in the middle, the top and bottom, but we'll fix those. So I'll click on Apply. I'll get rid of my cutaway object, X and delete, and back in Solid View we get a pretty good result. We still have to Boolean these together. As you can see, they're not in the right spots at all, but well, we'll fix that in a few minutes. Let's go ahead and make the front of the claw a bit better rounded. So I'll go into edit mode of that object, and what I'll do actually is dissolve some of these edges, so that edge and that edge and that edge, and let's look at this one, this one, and this one. I probably don't want, and on the bottom, because we made those diagonal or those kind of edges going across, we don't have the same triangle problems down there, which is awesome. So I'm going to dissolve those edges. I'll press X and we'll go to dissolve edges, and when you dissolve edges, it's very important that over here on your tool shelf you have dissolve vert selected. That will get rid of the vertices that are at the end of those lines. If you don't, you'll have kind of rogue vertices left over, which you don't want, obviously. Let's go ahead and make some bevels. We have forgotten about that entirely. But first, of course, let's fix the end of the claw. I'm going to get that edge and I'll hold shift and get that edge. And I'm going to scale those on the x-axis. I'll tap S and then X to bring those in like that. And then I'll press G and then I believe Y twice, and that will move that up like that. And if you don't know what direction to go, and press G and then X twice, it'll move it side to side like that, which is not what you want, so I figured out. And you can use your gizmo down here and change it to local, and then you can see which direction to move them so that you're moving them up together at the same rate. I don't like quite how those two edges are sticking out there, so I'll kind of move those. And maybe I'll scale those S and then X a bit like that, and then move it a bit like that, so that you don't quite get, or you do get the shape that you want. So right about like that. That's looking pretty good to me. We will use the subdivision surface modifier to smooth this all out, but of course we need to make our beveled edges and our proximity loops first. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to select the top face or the edge around and it doesn't really matter because when you select a face it selects its edges too, but I'll deselect those two edges. And what's going on down here with these? Because we had that side to side edge down here, I gotta get rid of those, so I gotta dissolve. I believe that's all I have to do is dissolve those two edges, because we moved those around but we didn't move around the bottom side to side edges. So I'll press X with those two edges selected and I'll say dissolve edges, so that will fix hopefully that. And it looks like my claw now at the bottom has kind of sort of a funny shape. So what I'll do is I think I just need to move these vertices down so that they are matching kind of the flow. Alright, so I paused the video for a second and I orbited around and I took a look at the topology of the bottom of the mesh, and I discovered that because I moved some of the edges around on the kind of tip of the claw, and because I had some edges running across the bottom of the mesh, that it kind of changed the way that things sort of oriented themselves to one another and where the rectangle should be. So as it turns out, or as it stands right now, that vertice right there at the side of that side-to-side edge doesn't actually correspond with a edge that runs up the height of the hand or claw. So I'm actually going to create that on both sides. What I'll do is I'll go into edge select mode. I'm going to select those two edges on both sides. I'll select those ones as well with the shift key held down. And I'll press W on my keyboard to bring up the specials menu, and I'll select subdivide. That will make a cut that goes down that height of the hand. And now I'm going to merge together the two vertices at the bottom so that this vertex here will actually have a edge to go up, so that the bottom of the hand always has rectangles. Otherwise we could merge things together but we would get a triangle. So I'm going to just merge these two together. I'll select both of these, and I believe I'll just go to to the last one that I selected. I'll select this one first, I'll shift select that one, and press W and or Alt M, and then merge at last. And so now we have an edge, and we're going edge that goes up from that vertice. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and then we're going to fix its position. So if I grab that vertice and I hold shift and get that vertice, and then I'll press W and merge at last. So now we have that edge going up and it's connected in the right way. Let's go ahead and select those two edges, which now are just sort of in the middle of a face, and I'll tap S and then X to move it inwards, and maybe I'll move it on its local Y-axis so that it's just sort of following the right nice curve, and I'll get those two and sort of adjust around. And maybe I'll press G twice to slide that down there. Looks pretty good to me. Maybe I'll tap S and then X to bring it in a little bit so it's rounded. Perfection. Okay, let's go ahead and do a quick save. I'll press Control S on my keyboard and we'll save this version 6. In fact, now that I've saved that, I'll go to File and Save As, and I'll do a plus to make this version 7. Again, I'm saving onto my desktop, so at the end of this I'll have a whole bunch of copies of the Lego person as I'm modeling it through, so I can always go back to an earlier version if I need to. In fact, I should be saving more than I am right now. Let's go ahead and make some bevels and some proximity loops. So what I'll do is I'm going to select the top faces, and I'm going to then deselect that middle edge there. I only want to have the edge selected, and I'll do the same thing on the bottom. I'll hold Alt and Shift and right click with Alt and Shift held down, and that way I can get all the edges that go around, and I'll have to deselect some of the ones that I don't want, but that's just the way it is. I actually will go back into object mode, and I'll select that one, and I'll go back into global. I just want to move that out. For now, let's go back into edit mode, and let's select the rest of these edges, and I'll deselect the edges I don't want, which are these ones. Do I have any edges that I don't want? Yes, I do. Anything over there? So we're looking pretty good. I've got all the edges that I want. I'm going to bevel those, so I'll press Control B to bevel, and I'll pull those out, and I'll scroll just so we get a little small bevel there. That looks good to me. I'm going to do a couple of loop cuts. Control R, click, and I'll put a proximity loop right about there, and Control R and click, and I'll put one right about there. Let's go ahead and select the top face and then the bottom faces and do some insetting. I'll tap I to inset to make a top proximity loop there, and then on the bottom I'll select all of these faces and I'll make some proximity loops. These proximity loops, of course, just help the smoothing work better. If I tap inset, what's going on there? Do I have an extra rogue edge there? What's going on there? Looks like I have a diagonal edge that I can't see, but maybe that's just because I'm looking at things in a transparent way. If I tap H there, I can hide that face. I'll tap Alt H to unhide that. Alright, so I paused the video there for a second again, and I zoomed in at the bottom of the hand right there, and I noticed that I have some vertices that are duplicated. I probably had two vertices very close to one another, and then when I beveled, it sort of messed things up a little bit. So what I'm just going to do is, if you look at this, there are two vertices in each spot. So I'm just going to select one pair at a time. So I'll select these two, and I'm always going to select the one that I want to keep last, and I'll press W and merge and at last. I'll do the same thing again and again. Merge at last, like these two. W merge at last. And if you are new to modeling especially, you will probably find that you have little errors like this if you're not careful, or if you're in my case, you'll find that if you go quickly and you're recording a tutorial on your screen, that you'll run into problems like this too. At last, and so now that problem is solved. Let's go ahead and select these end faces now, and I will inset them. So I'll tap I and inset. Ooh, I've had the same thing over here. I probably didn't merge those faces properly. I'm going to pause the video very quickly and solve this. Okay, so hopefully I've finished patching up those two sides where I had duplicate vertices. Let's go ahead and select the bottom faces of the hand, and I should be able to inset now. I'll tap I to inset and that's looking really good to me. So I've got now my proximity loops. I noticed that because of that same error, if you look on the inside of my hand, I have this proximity loop right there that goes all the way on the outside, but then it gets cut off on the inside. So I'm just going to subdivide these edges that go around the inside because for some reason I can't do a loop cut on the inside. I'm not sure why that's a problem right now. But what I'll do is I'm going to select with Alt and Control held down and then Shift held down all of these inside parallel edges. It's called an edge ring, and I'll just hold Shift and get the rest of them here, and right there, and right there. If I press W and subdivide those now, I should get an edge that runs all the way around the inside middle there, and I'll press G twice to slide that down to right about where the proximity loop is right there. I'm going to select those again and press G twice again to move those down to where the boats they should be. And then I can just attach these ones, J right there, and J to join vertices together in the same mesh. Same thing up top. I can now press, let's see if I can press Control R. No, it's not going to work so well. So I'll do the same thing again. I'm going to select those same parallel edges, the edge ring right there to right there. Great. W and subdivide, and I'll get that edge loop in the middle there, and I'll press G twice. I'll slide it up to about the top, about to match where the other one is, maybe a little bit lower than that. G twice, and then I'll use J and connect together these vertices, J and J. That looks pretty good to me. What happens when we add subdivision surface to this now? But actually, before I do that, I will merge these two objects together. Of course, I need to bevel some edges here, and this one will be much easier. I need to bevel the edge there, and I'll hold Shift and Alt and get that one and that one. I'm not going to worry about this one because that will be gone in the middle of the claw. So I'll press Control B to bevel this out, and I'll scroll up a little bit so we get some rounded corners. I'll do some loop cutting, Control R, click, right click, and then bevel that to make two edges there, and inset that one, and Control R, click, right click, Control B to bevel that out, Control R right there, and slide that up. So now we have proximity loops all around where, pardon me, right there, and right there, and right there, and right there, and right there, where we have an edge. Let's go ahead and Boolean these two objects together. Of course, this wrist sticks too far into the hand, so I'm going to go into edit mode. So I'm going to change my gizmo to normal, and that will go in the right direction now, and I can move that up to be inside the hand, making sure not to go too far there. So that looks pretty good to me. Let's go back into object mode. I'm going to select the claw. I'm going to add a modifier. It's going to be the Boolean modifier, of course, right there. We're going to select the wrist object. I'll name it first as wrist, and I'm going to, under the Boolean modifier, point to my wrist, and we're going to use the union to make them both into one object. And as you can see now, because the claw, the hand part, had its rotation not applied, that its local orientation is still that nice direction where the arrow points up where it should. So that's a good thing. And so now I'll press apply to make that union permanent, and I'll get rid of the original wrist object. So now we have one mesh that is our hand. But there's actually one more thing that we need to do, actually a couple of steps in the one more thing we need to do. The edge where the wrist meets the hand, this is the tricky part. This is where in the last video we had problems where we had to make the edges of our leg holes rounded, and I make a proximity loop around the holes to make the normals issues go away. The same problem goes here. It's very hard to do beveling when your edges are constructed via a Boolean and a union or a difference operation, and cutting out the proximity loop is quite tricky. Now in the last video when I made the proximity loops around the leg holes, I used to use the knife tool very roughly, but a commenter, a viewer on that video pointed out that I could use the knife project tool. So thank you to that user. I'll be doing that in this video. The knife project tool, I knew that it existed, I just could not remember what it was called, so I couldn't actually use it if I couldn't find it. Let's go ahead and bevel out that edge that goes all the way around where the wrist meets the hand. So I'm going to have to just go around a little bit tediously and Alt and Shift to select all of these edges, and then I'll use the circle select to deselect the edges that are extra. So let's get those ones, and I'll go into wireframe mode, and if I can tell where I'm looking, right about there and there, that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to go into wireframe mode with the Z key, and I'm going to press C to use my circle select, and I can middle mouse click and get rid of my extra selection there and there. Did I lose one over there? No, it looks pretty good to me. Now when you're beveling in a circumstance like this, if you have vertices or edges that are close together and you bevel, you might get some crossover like I am right there, you can see. So what you might need to do is you might need to kind of adjust where things go. You might need to merge vertices together, W and merge at last, and you kind of have to decide where you want to go, if you want this vertice to go where that one is or vice versa. But I'm just going to kind of go along with it and see where I need to merge things together and just sort of decide which one to go to and which one to keep and get rid of. So in this case, I'm going to get rid of this one and move it up to that one, W, merge at last. And how are we doing otherwise? Those two are pretty, or those three are pretty close, but not that close. Let's get these two, W, merge at last, W, merge at last. And I know that if it's on this side, it's probably on the other side as well. W, merge at last, and W, merge at last. And so I think we're pretty good. I'm going to select that same edge loop again, using Shift and Alt at the same time to select, and right click to select all those edges. And there we go. And I'll go into wireframe mode, I'll zoom out a little bit, I'll press C to circle select, and I'll middle click to deselect the edges that I don't want. I'll press enter, and that looks pretty good to me. Let's go ahead and press Control B to bevel this out, and I'll scroll up a few times just to make it rounded. Now the proximity loop is the tricky part. In the last video again, I just used the knife tool to very roughly cut out the proximity loop, but in this video I'm going to use a better technique. Again, that user pointed out on the video that I could use the knife project tool. I've got a very bad angle here, so I'm just going to move that over there. What I want to do here is I want to add a circle mesh object to my scene just as its own separate object, and that's going to get used as like a stencil or like a cookie cutter. So how this is going to work is I'm going to put my 3D cursor at the end of the top of the wrist. So I'll go into edit mode just so we have our 3D cursor in about the right spot. So I'll select that face, I'll press Shift S to bring up my snap menu, and I'm going to say cursor to selected, and now let's put my 3D cursor right up there. I'll go back into object mode, press Shift A to add a mesh circle, and that added a mesh circle right where the end of that wrist is. Now if I look at the wrist or hand right from the top of the wrist like that, so I'm seeing this most like a circle. This circle object that I have selected right now is sort of at an angle. In fact, I'm going to scale this down first, but if I tap R twice will get me into this free rotation mode, so I can kind of just get the circle about as kind of centered on my view as I can to match where I'm looking at this, to make it look most like a circle to me, so not like that, but like that roughly. And I'll scale this down to be just a bit bigger than the wrist, and maybe move it over just a little bit. But what I'm going to do from this exact view is use this circle mesh as a stencil to project onto this object as a new edge. So how you do that is you select your stencil or your cookie cutter, your projector object first. You hold Shift and select the mesh you want to cut into. You go into edit mode now by pressing Tab, and now if you go up to on your tool shelf, you find knife project right there, and you click, it'll actually use that separate mesh as a projector knife, and as you can see now, it's actually made this new edge loop right there, which is what I want. Now that might be a little bit big, so I'll undo a few steps, Control Z a few times. I'll go back and select that, and from that same angle roughly, I'm going to scale this down straight about there. I'll select this mesh first, hold Shift, select that one, go into edit mode, and then knife project, and we're good to go. So now I can delete this object in edit mode, and now I have a proximity loop right there and a bevel. Let's go ahead and press Control R and I'll click and right click, and I didn't go all the way around for some reason. Click and right click. I might have to do this a few times because I realized I don't have a proximity loop down there as well. So Control R, click and right click, and I think I probably have some n-gons or something like that there. So what I'll do is I will select these vertices and just join them, J for join. Good, I'll go ahead and press G twice and move those down to right about there, so we have our proximity loop right there. And I think we're pretty good to go. We've got our finished hand. I think all I have to do now is make it smooth. If I go up on my tool shelf and click on smooth, and we're looking very, very good. I'll add the subdivision surface modifier, and I'll crank it up to 2. Why is that happening? The reason why this is happening is because I don't have enough subdivisions in those big n-gons, that face and the one on top as well, so it doesn't quite know how to smooth those out very well. So all I have to do here is grab some of the vertices in that big n-gon, the big faces with many, many sides, and join them together so we don't have quite so big of a funny shaped curved face. And as you can see now, the more I add, J, I'll add one there, J, and J, that is going away on the top. Maybe I'll just add a few more so we don't get that effect at all. And that looks pretty good to me. And same thing up here. We have a really big n-gon right there that I'll divide up. Let's go into vertex select mode and J. So that's looking pretty darn good to me. I think we have a finished hand. Let's go ahead and add that same material to it. It's the yellow material, and then we'll talk about material. So I'll select yellow and I'll put that in the right spot. Let's go ahead and change this viewport to material and move that over from the side view. I'll put it right where it needs to go, right about. I'll go into wireframe mode with the Z key, and so I can see the inside of the arm socket, and I'll press G and put that right about there. And then from my top view, I have to make sure it lines up as well from side to side, right about there. So now it should be in the right spot. Again, I'll go into material view, and there we have it. Let's go ahead, before we duplicate this hand, we're going to actually fix our pivot points, and we'll do the same thing with all the objects that rotate, like the hips and the legs and the arms and the head. First, though, I want to talk about materials very briefly. In the first part of this mini-series, I made a very quick plastic material that looks a little bit like plastic, but since then I've watched a few videos, particularly by Blender Guru and CG Cookie or Blender Cookie, and I've discovered a few things about why my material is so metallic or not very accurate looking. A couple of things here. If I select one of the objects in my scene, they're all the same except different colors, and I go up to my nodes, I made a very basic mixed material here out of a yellow diffuse shader and a glossy shader that has a little bit of yellow, and I learned that plastics do not have a colored reflection. I believe that was Blender Cookie's tutorial that taught me that. So right now it looks more like metal, more like a metallic object, because metallic objects have color reflections, plastics do not. So I'm going to change my glossy to pure white. Under RGB they all should be white, and they don't have to be perfect white, but I'll just leave mine at the top. So that's the first thing I'll do. I'll go to all three of my materials, yellow and red, and change that to white, and then blue, and then change that to RGB, all top values. That'll fix a little bit of it. The second part of the problem with my materials is that the reflection is not very accurate. And what I mean by that is if you actually look at any reflective object in the real world, the reflection does not reflect straight back at you wherever you're looking at the object from, as much as it reflects off to the side of your view. And that effect is called a couple of things, or there's a couple of elements of it. One of them is called index of refraction. You might have heard that term before. You might have also heard of the term Fresnel. And the saying goes that everything, or all materials, have the Fresnel effect, or all materials have Fresnel. So what I'm going to do is actually add a Fresnel node into here and plug it into the mix shader, and that's very easy. So I'll press Shift A with any of the materials selected. I've got blue right now selected. Shift A to add a new node, input, and Fresnel, not Fresnel, but Fresnel, and I'll put it right up here, and I'll connect the factor into the mix shader between my diffuse and my glossy. Now you'll see, actually, I'm going to look down here first. The shift key doesn't work very well on this keyboard. Right now, if I look at my object, some of the reflection is coming back quite directly at me, but now if I plug this in here, it just kind of changes the way that, in the direction that things reflect, and it makes it much more realistic, especially if you have a very, very glossy or reflective material. Plastic happens to have an index of refraction of 1.46. So I'm just going to type that in there. I'm going to do the same thing for my other materials as well. So red, Shift A, input Fresnel, click, and 1.46. And I'll plug that into there. Lastly, yellow, Shift A, input Fresnel, and I'll plug that into factor and 1.46. It's looking more realistic now. It's looking pretty good. What I can also do is change the roughness value. If my plastic is looking too rough of the glossy, I'm actually going to change it to 0.05, and that'll make the plastic a bit more glossy or reflective and not quite so foggy and dull. So I'll change that for all three of my materials. That was red. This is blue, 0.05, and let's get yellow. And that was, there we go, I need to do red. Perfection. Let's go ahead and do a quick save. I'll do Control S and click, and let's do an iterated save, file save as, and plus, and save as button file. So now we're working on version 8. The last thing I need to do is fix my rotation orientations and add constraints. So all we have to do is grab the hips piece of the Lego character and drag that around to move our character around, so we'll make animation easier to do just by having one kind of parent object that controls the rest. We also want to make sure that things rotate in the right direction. So let's go ahead and jump in. The first thing I'll do is I'm going to change the pivot point of my hips object, because right now this pivot point or origin is up here, but really we want to be in the middle of this circular section so that he can actually kind of bend down and pick something up, and it won't rotate sort of from the middle like that. It'll more rotate down there. So I'm going to go and hide. I'll press H with both of my legs selected. I'll go into edit mode. I'm going to select that face and that face at the same time. And if I go to my side view, they're actually a little bit different, which is a little bit embarrassing. What I'll do, I think I can do this pretty easily, is I'll actually use my symmetrize tool and symmetrize the positive X side, because I think that location right there is more accurate than that one. That one looks a little bit too high. So I'm looking at the little dot there. So I'm going to select everything. I'll press A few times. I'll press W and select symmetrize, and I'll make sure I'm going from positive X to negative X over here. So now I have a perfectly symmetrical hips object. And how does that look in rendered mode? Is there any problems there? No, it's looking pretty good to me. So now all I have to do is go into edit mode, select those two faces. I'll press Shift S. I'll put my cursor in the middle of that selection, so cursor 2 selected, and now I'll go back into object mode, and I'll say in my tool shelf under the first tab, set origin to 3D cursor. So now my 3D cursor is right in the middle of that circle. So now if I press R and then X, it'll rotate right in the middle of that circle approximately. Is it perfect? No, the circle is wobbling a little bit, so I could spend more time and make sure that the origin is right in the middle of the circle. I just use a very quick way of finding the middle of that middle face, but who knows? It's 3D modeling, it could be a little bit off, but I'll leave it the way it is. Let's go ahead and fix pivot point of the legs. I'll press Alt H to unhide. The legs look pretty good to me because we started off with a circle and or a cylinder rather, and so we extruded that down. Therefore, both pivot points are in the right spot. Let's look at the arms. They look pretty good to me. They're in the middle of that original circle as well. So I could, if they were not in the middle of that circle, I'll hide the body for now. I could just select that face and press Shift S, cursor to selected, and then set origin to 3D cursor, but they look pretty good to me. The problem though is that they will not rotate the right way. We'll fix that in just a sec. How is my head doing? You could put the pivot point or the origin in the middle of the bottom face in case you want to rotate forward or back, but that wouldn't be very realistic, but I'll just do that. Shift S, cursor to selected, and then set origin to 3D cursor, so now it rotates at the bottom. I don't know if that really matters or not. How is the body doing? Alt H to unhide that. The body's origin is in the middle. I'm not going to worry about that. So I think we're doing pretty good there. The hand is in the middle of the hand. I'm going to put that. I'll go into edit mode. I'll put that in the middle of that face. So Shift S, cursor to selected, and then I'll say origin to 3D cursor. But again, it's pointed in its local direction still. That's good for later on. Okay, let's go ahead and duplicate some objects, specifically the hand, and make a copy of it. So I will go back into solid, actually material view. I'll duplicate the hand from the front view, Shift D and X, and then I'll go to object, mirror, and X global, and I'll press enter. So now it's an exact flip of the other one. I'll go to my side view, and that's looking pretty good to me from the top. That looks pretty good to me. So now we're going to set up the parent-child constraints, and we're not going to use just normal parent-child because there are some benefits as opposed to just doing Control-P to make a parent. What I'm talking about here is, I'll switch this back to material, is if I want to make the head follow along with the body, if I move the body around, I want the head to follow it. If I select the head first, hold Shift and select the body, and I press Control-P and set parent to object. Control-P is to set parent to or parent keyboard shortcut. What happens here is, yes, I can grab the body and move the head around with it, but I can still move the head separately or rotate on the Z-axis the head separately if I want the head to turn around and look in different directions. The problem here is that I don't get any other controls, and I can't kind of change what is being parented in, like things like rotation and scale and movement and what directions. It's pretty limited. So I'm going to actually select the head and press Alt-P to clear its parent. I'll click on clear parent. So now hopefully if I look under the object tab with the head selected, the head has no parent right there. That's how you can tell. So now if I move the body, the head does not follow with it. What I'll do instead is I'm going to use the child of constraint. And so if you're not familiar with constraints, if I select the object I want to apply a constraint to a different object, in this case the head, I'll go up to this constraints tab, which looks like little links of a chain. I'll add a constraint called child of under relationship, and now I can select the next object in here. I can also use this eyedropper if I haven't named my objects properly. I have not, so I'll just use the eyedropper and click. Now when you use this constraint, things might shift a little bit if you have not applied their location, and we have not anywhere here. So what I'll do just to fix this gap is click on clear inverse and then set inverse, and that'll be true every time we do this. So I'm going to select that arm. I'll add a constraint, add child of constraint. We'll click on the eyedropper and use that, and clear inverse because they've got a gap there. Clear inverse, set inverse. And I'll do the same thing over here, add constraint child of, use the eyedropper, and that, and clear and set. So I'll go through this very quickly and apply all the constraints. We're going to make the body a child of the hips, and then both of the legs children of the hips as well, and the hands will be children of the arms. Alright, so I finished adding all the child of constraints to all of the objects that should be children of other objects. So now if I select the hips object, that's the parent of the legs and the torso. So if I grab the hips and move it around or rotate it around, everything else follows with it. If I move the arms, the hands are children of the arms, so the hands follow along with each of the arms. So we are pretty good to go, but not everything is great right now. If I grab one of the arms, I can press R from any view I'm looking at it from and rotate it in any random direction, and obviously that's not the way that a Lego character can rotate in real life. I'll press Ctrl Z to undo that. Also, if I grab this hip section and I press R and then X on my keyboard to rotate it forward like he's bending down to pick something up, the legs just kind of go and stick back. They follow along with their rotation of their parent object, which is not what I want. I want the legs to stay planted if I rotate this hip section forward or backwards on that x-axis. So let's go ahead and solve some of these issues. I'm going to select one of the legs first and look at this child of constraint that's on any of the objects, and you can see that now we can actually, with this constraint, uncheck or customize what is actually influenced by its parent. Right now, all axes of location, rotation, and scale are influenced, but I'm going to uncheck the x-axis rotation of this leg. So now, if I grab the hips object and I press R and then X, that leg will stay planted because it's not inheriting the rotation on the x-axis from its parent. But if I grab that same hips object and I press R just in any other direction, it will follow along, just not in the x-axis. So I'll right click to put that back in the same spot. We'll do the same thing with the other leg. I'll uncheck X. So now if I select the hips bone and I press R and then X, I can make my character bend backwards or forwards and the legs will stay planted. Also, I don't want to be able to rotate the legs in any direction I want. If I press R right now, you can see they're rotating in not a very realistic way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to constrain these legs to only be able to rotate on their local X-axis. What I can do here is I can open up my side panel, and at the very top of this side properties panel, which you can press N or this little plus to show, I'm going to lock the rotation on everything except for this x-axis. So I'll lock the Y and Z. So now if I press R from any direction, it'll only rotate, and you might have to change your view to rotate it properly. It'll only rotate in that proper direction. So let's go ahead and select this leg and lock Y and Z as well. So now it will only rotate in the right direction. We have to do the same thing for these arms, although this is a bit more complicated because the arms are not rotating on a perfect axes, no matter if you're looking at it local or through normal or global. If I press R and then X, you can see that it's still not rotating the way we want. How we can fix this is I'm just going to hide the body for now. I'll press H with the body selected. What I have to do here is I have to rotate it so that this face is pointing up and down, and then apply the rotation and then rotate it back. So I'll go to my front view, I'll press R to rotate, and I'm going to rotate it so that this face is as up and down as I can make it. So I'm looking at kind of the way that it's rotating and the kind of jaggy edge at the side of it. So I'm looking and making sure it's straight up and down, kind of like that. And I will, with it rotated just like that, I will apply this object's rotation. So object, apply, and rotation. So now its normals are facing the same direction as the world. And now I'll press R and rotate it back to right about there. I'll Alt H to unhide the body, and let's go ahead and fix that rotation. I'll press R on the arm, and there we go. So now if I lock the rotation on the Y and Z axis and I tap R, it will only let me rotate. I have to do it from a certain angle. It might not work straight on, but if I press R now, it'll only rotate on that nice axis. So as you can see now, it is where it should be. If I press R more, you can see that it's not going away, and that's because I locked the Y and the Z axis. I'll press Alt R to clear that rotation. Let's go and do the same thing over here. I'll go to that one in the front view. I'll press R to rotate it so that it's facing up and down. I'll hide, or I'll go into wireframe mode so I can see this a bit better, and I can use kind of my grid as a guide. So right about there. And I'll go ahead and apply object, apply a rotation, and I'll rotate this back, R, and I'll press Z to go back into solid view, and maybe I'll put that a little bit closer to the body, and I'll go back into material view. Let's go ahead and lock the Y and the Z axes. So now if I rotate that arm, it will work nicely. Oops, my hand is not in the right spot. So I'll go to my top view and go into wireframe. Actually, I'll go to my side view and I'll clear the rotation of this arm, Alt R, and let's go to my top view and I'll put this where it should be. Actually, when I applied the rotation of the arms just now, it messed up the rotation of the hands, but this is a quick fix. If I select each one of the hands, because they have that child of constraint on them, when I change the rotation of the arms, it kind of changed these ones as well because of the constraint. So I'll press Alt-R, and that will clear the rotation of the hands. And all I have to do now, I'll have to do the same thing on the other side, is I'll rotate them from the side just to match their sockets again. So right there, and from the top view. And from my top view, I'll just do a few little minor corrections here. Now you'll notice that if I clear the rotation of the hand, that it's no longer rotated straight up and down. So I'll actually press R and then Y twice to kind of fix its rotation. I'll go back into solid view so you can see what's going on here. If I go to my front view, you can see that the hands are now kind of pointed inwards. So I'll select the hands and press R and then Y twice. So I can just rotate the hand as if it were rotating naturally. And I'll put it right about there. So now that hand is approximately back in the right spot. I'll go to my side view and into Wireframe. I can put it back really in the right spot right there. That should be just about perfect. Let's go ahead and fix the other one. I'll select that one. I'll press Alt-R to clear its rotation. I'll go to my side view. I will fix its rotation right about there, and from Wireframe I can put it right back in the socket, at least from the side view, R right about there. And then from the top view, it needs to get fixed side to side. I'll change my gizmo back to global, and I'll move it over right there. And from the side view again, how's that looking? Just the rotation's a little bit off. And so now I can fix its rotation if it's not pointing straight up and down, and it's not, I can press R and then Y twice to make sure it's kind of pointing up and down, which is what I want. Perfection. Let's go ahead and make sure that we can't rotate these hands except in any other direction than on its local Y axis. So I'm going to lock its X and Z axes. So now if I tap R, this is an issue. Right now, even though the axes in local are correct and I lock the X and Z axes, you would think it would spin nicely if I tap R and then Y twice without these locked. You can see that it's spinning the way that I want it to, but if I lock X and Z, it's not spinning the way I want it to. Not at all. And the reason why this is happening is because of its rotation mode, this thing right here, X, Y, Z, and this is pronounced Euler. And what this means is that it actually processes rotation in the order of this rotation mode. So it processes the X rotation first, and then Y, and then Z. So if I change this rotation mode, and you can see there's lots of options here, to the axes that I actually want it to rotate first. In this case, I'm going to change it to one of the Y's first. I'm going to use Y, X, Z, Euler. You can see it kind of shifts a little bit, but now if I tap R, it'll rotate in the right direction. So I'll just go ahead and correct that little mistake. I'll unlock the axes just to kind of correct it here. I'll go to my top view and I'll press R and rotate it like that. Looks pretty good to me. From my front view, that's looking okay, and from my side view, it's looking okay. So I'm going to lock Z and X again, and so now if I tap R, it will rotate only in the right direction, again, mostly because we changed this rotation mode. Let's go to the same thing over here. I'll select that hand. We're going to change the rotation mode to YXZ, and it kind of shifts a little bit there. Let's go ahead. If I press Alt-R, is that going to clear it? No, I'll press Control-Z. I'll have to fix it manually from the side. It got a little bit rotated there, and from the top, it got a little bit rotated there too, so I'll fix that. How's that looking now? It's looking pretty good. To me, just a little bit off there. I'll lock the Z and the X axes, and now if I rotate this, it will only spin in the right direction. How are we doing here? If I select that arm, it's only going to rotate in the right direction. That arm is looking pretty good. The head obviously can only spin on its Z axis, so I'm going to lock the X and Y. So now if I tap R, it's hard to tell, but yes, it is spinning only in that right direction. That looks pretty good to me. This object can spin in any which direction because we want it to flip around. The body should only be able to spin on its local Z axis, so I'm going to lock the X and the Y rotation. Don't get confused between location and scale lock rotation ones only. So now I can rotate that and it won't kind of mess up. I think we are doing pretty good. Let's go ahead and switch back into material view and look at our object. And what you have to do at this point is just sort of test different scenarios. See if you can rotate things and move things in the way that you would want. See that all the rotations are the way that they should be. But that will be it for this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and check out my Facebook page at facebook.com/borncg. In the next tutorials, we're going to be looking at applying a face texture that you can actually animate to make it look like it's talking, sort of like a Lego movie or a stop motion movie. So that will be in the next upcoming tutorials. But thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.